Hello everybody, welcome back to our series where we make every BJCP cider style. I'm Kevin, and today we're going to be making cider style C1A, but we're going to be making it a little bit differently than the previous way we had made it. So the previous way that we had made cider style C1A, or New World cider, is based off of just pure store-bought juice alone, and this time we're going to be using some of our own pressed juice, in addition to some concentrate for apple varieties that we can't get in the United States in order to add some extra complexity. This, as mentioned, is going to be a juice blend. We're going to be using 60% of what I would refer to as a neutral base. In this case, it's going to be Treetop 3-apple blend. We're going to be using 15% of a sharp sweet apple. This has been fresh pressed Granny Smith's. You can tell that it's been massively oxidized while it's been pressed. And we're going to be using 10% of a sweet base. In this case, it's fresh pressed Honeycrisp Apples. And then we're going to be using 10% or 15 more percent of a bittersweet base. And in this case, it's going to be, a bittersweet juice. In this case, it's going to be using this UK bittersweet apple blend from More Beer. I think this adds a good amount of tannin and extra complexity to the cider that I wouldn't normally have. So I'm going to be adding that in to increase mouthfeel and longevity of the cider on the palate. Because these are fresh pressed juice, we're going to be using some pectic enzyme, 20 grams in this instance. And that's about it. We're going to be using cider yeast. For this, it's going to be Sap Cider AC4. I like this yeast. I think that from my testing of it, I'm just going to set this bag down because it's going to fall over its own. From my testing of it, it has better color retention of any other yeast I've used, and it also has pretty good body and aroma. So I kind of like this yeast. It's pretty good. It also finishes kind of crisp and neutral and lets the flavors of the apple juice just kind of do their own thing rather than you having to direct it down a path via back sweetening or any other things like that in order to increase aroma, or even using a pressurized fermentation in order to retain some of the aroma. It kind of just keeps its own character of the apples, and I quite like that. So this is going to be a non-pressurized fermentation. We're going to be using just a 7-gallon Big Mouth bubbler for this, and that's pretty much it. We're going to start by combining everything into a single batch. So we're going to go through the process of just measuring the quantity of juice we have. It's not an exact science. For this, I'm anticipating on getting 3/4 of a gallon of our Granny Smith juice, a half a gallon of our Honeycrisp juice, and then I will be adding 3/4 of a gallon of our UK cider concentrate using, I believe, Dabinett apples. And these that's going to be up to 3/4 of a gallon of water for 0.15 gallons of concentrate to make it a 4 parts water to 1 part cider ratio. I find that ratio pretty good. I used 7 pounds of Honeycrisp apples and 9 pounds of Granny Smith apples. So the reason why we want to use a neutral base as a method to kind of build upon, it allows us to do two things. It gives us a good unintrusive blend that allows us to build on top of it and add characters of each of the apples that we're adding. And the second part is, from a cost perspective, a neutral base is significantly less expensive. Each one of these half a gallons in my region is about $2.99 American. And the apples per pound are anywhere between $1.99 and $2.49 per pound. And it takes about just over 15 pounds of apples in general in order to make a full gallon of juice. If you can do the math there, this juice comes out to about 7.5 times as expensive when you fresh press it versus when you just buy it from the store. So if the overall, if we're not trying to make a single varietal or making a total juice blend, like getting apples from an orchard in order to do that, I would recommend that you start from a neutral base and then build up on top of it, adding the character of the apples you'd like. If you are trying to do a single varietal, know that that's going to be expensive if you're buying it from supermarket apples. And if you are buying it from an orchard, it's still going to be expensive, but less expensive, and you get to support local business too. One thing to note for single varietals is that you don't have to make 5-gallon batches of everything. I make 5-gallon batches of a lot of things in order to keg them and force carbonate them. There are other methods you can do to naturally carbonate your your cider, like bottle conditioning. Well, that's pretty much it, bottle conditioning. But you can also stop fermentation by pasteurization if you're going to do that and you want to have a sparkling sweet cider. So there's going to be a time when I'm going to do a pasteurization video in the future, but this is not that video. We're going to be doing a 5-gallon batch. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. As you can tell, our wort has been highly oxygenated. It is brown right now. But we're still going to go ahead through the process of oxygenating a little bit further by giving a nice good shake up. But now I'm going to take the time to actually add our pectic enzyme. I'm going to be adding 20 grams of pectic enzyme in order to further break down some of this cloudy pectin haze that we have remaining from our fresh pressed juice. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now and then give this a nice good shake. Shaky time. All right, we're going to go ahead and mix this pectic enzyme into here before we give it a shake to get a nice good rotating around. Incorporate it in there. Get nice good there. And then just go ahead and give this a little bit of oxygenation. Shake. The reason why we oxygenate at the beginning of the fermentation is because part of the yeast life cycle, and slowly remove your thumb, part of the yeast life cycle, when you start a brew, requires oxygen in order to reproduce. So we're just basically making sure that they have all the necessary resources to succeed. So if your yeast aren't happy, you're not going to be happy. Trust me. Now that we have oxygenated our must very, very thoroughly, we're going to go ahead and add our remaining juice, our Treetop 3 apple blend. We're just going to add it directly into the top of it. I'm going to reiterate myself here when I say that this juice is significantly less expensive than fresh pressing stuff. While it is less expensive, though, it does kind of have, you can't really tell what apples are in it. It's a blend. So we're trying to get character from other things and add it to here. Furthermore, the tannin content of this really isn't quite substantial enough to have a noticeable effect on the final product. So that's why we added our bittersweet apples. If we didn't add that, if we did not add our bittersweet apples, we could always add powdered wine tannin. I prefer FT Blanc because I think it adds a more smooth mouth feeling to something like a red wine tannin. Anyway, the point of this is to go ahead and not use any additional chemicals if we don't have to. The pectic enzyme is kind of a must. It's not going to clear if you don't use pectic enzyme. But the rest of the kind of what I like to refer to as balancing additions, there aren't 100% necessary if you get a good blend of apples. Furthermore, I'm not adding any additional nutrition to this because, quite frankly, all those extra skins and peels in here are going to have lots of nitrogen content that the yeast can use to assimilate into their cells and then go ahead and reproduce more yeast. The amount of nitrogen in within a brew is referred to as YAN, or yeast assimilable nitrogen, I think, or accessible. One of the two. It's basically just the quantity of nitrogen in grams per liter that the yeast can actually have access to. But we have enough nitrogen, in my opinion. I think that we're going to be good on that. I'll let you know if we get any off smells from this, but I don't anticipate it. We have a lot of biomatter in this. So, finish off our last gallon. Now that we're done adding our juice, it is time for us to take a initial gravity reading, a pH reading, and a taste sample of what we got going on. So let's go ahead and do that. The device we're using to take a sample is called a wine thief. It is basically a tube with a stem valve at the end that when you put it into the liquid, the stem valve allows the flow of liquid to come in until you remove it from the liquid, and then that stem valve has the pressure of the liquid on top of it and closes the valve. This allows you to take a sample from inside of a liquid without having to worry about too much drippage because, well, it's not a perfect system. These valves are not spring-loaded, so we're going to go ahead and take a sample. I had a commenter a while back ago say take samples at a diagonal so that you can get the full length of the carboy in there, and I think that's been a pretty valuable tip. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that into here. I don't pretend to know absolutely everything. I'm just here to teach you what I know. And anybody that has valuable information, I like to assimilate into my processes because that is helpful. All right. Of course, this is going to be finicky today because we've got lots of foam. Let's go ahead and try and get those foam bubbles out of here. It's looking like we're at 1.052. I think I did a calculation to say that we should be at 1.051, but this is pretty darn close in my opinion, so I'm just going to call that good. Well, that's about it. We've gone ahead and put on our lid and our airlock, and we're going to go ahead and let this sit for a few weeks in order to finish its primary fermentation. This has a lot of dissolved solids in it due to, number one, this apple juice concentrate that we had used that's from more beer. They kind of have more of like a gritty texture to it and a lot of dissolved solids in it. And the other things that had a lot of solids were our fresh pressed juice. So we're going to probably let this sit a little bit longer than normal in order to allow it to clear naturally. But this will be a few weeks in order to clear naturally. Once that gets done, we're going to put it into a secondary and let it sit for a little bit more in order to age. Okay, going to start with our evaluation of this cider. The color of this cider is a wonderful amber color. It has pretty good head retention. Appearance-wise, it's a little bit cloudy, but has wonderful carbonation to it. You can see there's like a vigorous amount of bubbles just coming out of the bottom of it. This is a sparkling cider, in my opinion. Appearance-wise, yeah, it could definitely afford to be a little bit less cloudy. I'm not quite sure what the haze is from. This has been about 2 months, so maybe it'll settle out over time, but it looks pretty drinkable right now. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a smell. This is actually really delightful. It smells like just fresh apple juice. That's kind of weird for dry ciders. This cider is just completely dry. Yeah, it just smells like fresh apple juice. Usually you have more like a winey type of smell with ciders like this. So, very refreshing smelling. Yeah, not much aroma notes. Other than that, just fresh apples. Not really getting anything off either. So let's give it a taste. All right, short sip wise, you can definitely tell it's a dry cider. It does have a lot of residual sweetness to it, though. Like, I am quite impressed by how much residual sweetness it has, honestly. This thing is bone dry. It's 1.000, like dry. But it has a lot of apple character to it. The tartness of it is well balanced out. It kind of has a nice little refreshing immediate tartness to it. So that's what I'm getting originally. And that kind of it's well balanced with the dryness of the cider. I think you're getting a pretty good amount of apple character here too. So let's give it a little bit of a longer taste. So, long sip, initial hit, that really acidy, malic acid forward flavor is definitely prominent here. But as it kind of rounds out the mouthfeel for the cider, as the cider kind of like rounds out, you get that kind of like bitterness and astringency running through your mouth of the tannins. It is not what I would describe as like a woody tannin. It's more of like a sweet tannin, like a soft tannin. It's definitely, in my opinion, this variety is definitely better for getting that overall apple sense for having no sugar in it than the other one that I made, the other New World cider I made, that has that kind of I don't want to call it like fake apple character to it. It's more of like a fake apple tannin, because we added tannins to it that were gallnut tannins, the FT Blanc. This one has, in my opinion, significantly more character to it. It has a nice like rounded feel to it. This feels like apple cider. This is more of that, akin to that. There's no off flavors. I'm not getting any sort of yeast character. This is just like good dry cider, which is nice. It's really hard to get that apple character. Like it kind of feels like a crapshoot sometimes when you're making cider, to get that apple character out of your cider, and not to have to feel like you have to add things to the store cider, because most of my cider I make, just due to the nature of the apple market, is going to use store-bought juice. So being able to blend in like a gallon of store-bought apples, a gallon is roughly 15 pounds of store-bought apples, and then have another variety of apples there to blend into it. I think I used Granny Smith and Honeycrisp in here. I'll put the actual ratios in the video at the beginning. But having those apples as to add character really just builds on top of that really neutral cider base that we get from the treetop apple juice. So I'm not saying the treetop apple juice produces a bad cider. It doesn't produce a perfectly drinkable one, but I think this one has significantly more character. It's hard to say that without sounding snooty, like, oh, I just my blend is so much better than treetops. But this feels better. It feels right comparatively. So, all right, overall evaluation. So I'm evaluating this as a dry cider. The dry cider kind of category is a little bit difficult because people, when they drink cider in the commercial market in the US, expect sweetness. But I prefer drier ciders. So I'm going to allow my preference to not weigh on this decision at all. But I'm going to give this cider a 9 out of 10. This cider has really good character, really good flavor. It has all of the apple presence you would like. It has that wonderful rich caramel color, or amber color rather. It looks the part, it tastes the part like a dry cider. And this is all stuff you can just buy in the supermarket, which is great. What I would say that I'm marking it down for is I wanted it to be perfectly clear. It's pretty hazy comparatively to filtered apple juice. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's not quite as as good for evaluation purposes. For competition wise, this would be marked down for clarity, I believe. I'm not 100% certain. This is one of the ones that for next year, I'm going to go ahead after this video and bottle this up. I'm going to submit this one next year. I think this one will do particularly well. It has a lot of really nice qualities for a dry cider, and I think it'll do well in competition. So anyway, that's it. I'm going to call this cider Tart and Tannic. I think that this that name kind of fits this cider pretty well. It is tart, it is tannic, it is dry, but it is balanced with both the alcohol, the residual sweetness, and the apple character. This is just a good cider. So anyway, thank you for coming along with this on this cider trip. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and have a good day and happy cidering.